Hello and welcome back to Life on the Wrist. Hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be looking at this Rolex reference 6430 manufactured in 1954. I can guarantee that some of you reading this article or watching our video have never heard of Sir Malcolm Campbell. Not that that's a bad thing, but even for Rolex fans, knowing someone like Paul Newman or even Roger Federer for their association with the brand is far easier. So who is Sir Malcolm Campbell? We'll get into the reference 6430 that you see in front of you, but I think it's helpful to understand who this gentleman was. Sir Campbell was a British racing motorist and journalist. He was born in Kent and was educated in Germany, where he became interested in motorbikes and racing. He returned to England and participated in motor racing events, even racing in the Grand Prix and winning in 1927 and 1928 in France, driving a Bugatti T37A. He first broke the land speed record in 1924 by driving 235.22 kilometers per hour or 146.16 miles per hour. And this is really where he became incredibly important to, I guess, the history of mankind and the sport of motor racing. He continued to break records up until his final land record that he set at the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, USA, in 1935, where he was the first person to drive an automobile over 300 miles per hour, or 484.955 kilometers per hour. Now, with all of these incredible accolades, Sir Malcolm Campbell earned himself the nickname King of Speed, and rightfully so. Even cooler, he was a huge Rolex fan. Famously, he was wearing a Rolex Oyster when he set the record speed of 300 miles per hour in Utah. This was documented by Rolex in their advertisements, and it was an attempt to demonstrate the technology that Rolex offered in their watches and the accolades of those who wore them. So to commemorate the incredible achievements of the King of Speed and also to capitalize on a great marketing opportunity, Rolex named one of their models the Speed King. These watches were first launched in the middle of the 1930s and had every bit of watchmaking technology one can imagine. It had precision movements and Oyster cases for a watertight and dust-proofed seal. This version of the Speed King is a reference 6430 and dates to 1954 based on the serial number between the lugs of the watch. As mentioned, the watch has a 30mm stainless steel case that's obviously an Oyster design and is overall in good condition, but for 1950s obviously shows signs of wear. The watch has a steel smooth bezel that is in good condition and gives the watch a much more tool-inspired aesthetic. The lugs are sharp with signs of polishing, but they also have holes. I'll try to get a little bit of a close-up here for you on one of the lugs. As you can see obviously signs of polishing. The beveled edges a lot softer than you would imagine, but they still remain fairly sharp, especially when you sort of flip them over and you can see the lugs a little bit more closely. Now, it's foolish for me to think that this watch is not small. 30mm is definitely small for today's standard and not something that everyone can wear. Luckily for those with smaller wrists, I think the watch can really be enjoyed. The dial of the watch is a white color and it has applied hour markers and Rolex crown. There are a few versions of the Speed King dials that can be found on the market. This version has, as you can see, it has Rolex, Oyster, and Speed King on separate lines, and what we'll refer to this going forward is a three-liner. But there are some that could be described as two-liners, where Oyster and Speed King are written below the Rolex name. One could posture that the two-liners came before the three-liners based on many of the watches that are found online, although there is some overlap where you see versions like this with three lines, but you see other two-liners in the 1950s. So the dial configurations, there's probably a little bit of overlap in the 1950s. The dial and the crystal of this watch do have signs of age, especially given the tool nature of the watch. It's likely been worn and loved by its previous owner. The watch runs on the caliber 1210 manual wind movement. This movement was launched in 1954 and was Rolex's basic manual wind movement modified off of the Rolex 1200 caliber. The caliber 1210 has a center seconds, while another caliber that came around this time was the caliber 1215, which is a modified version with a date complication. The movement is 10.5 lines and oscillates at a frequency of 18,000 vibrations per hour. Incredibly, it has a power reserve of 58 hours, which is quite substantial when you think about the size of this watch. And if you want to see pictures of the movement, you can check out the article on lifeandtherest.com. It will be the first link in the description. But even if you consider the 30mm case, the barrel for this watch has to be large for 58 hours of power reserve. With the case back off, one can see the inside case back for more information about the watch. One will see the typical Rolex stamp and the case metal, which is stainless steel. One will also see the reference number 6430, which matches the reference number found between the lugs of this watch. Below the reference number, one will see a stamp that says the Roman numeral 3 and then 63. This is an additional indication for when the case of this watch was manufactured. That was done by Rolex. This system was used between the 1950s and 1970s, and essentially the Roman numerals describes the quarter in which the watch was made, and then the number describes the year. So in this case, it was made in the third quarter of 1963. Now here we have a mismatch of the caseback numbering and the serial number that you have on the between the lugs of this watch. The case serial number describes the watch being produced in 1954, and the caseback describes it being produced in 1963. There are a few explanations. The easiest one is that the caseback comes from a different watch, which is quite common. But there's another possibility that's also a very common situation where when Rolex watches were serviced, the service caseback could have been mixed up from the original. As I mentioned, the watch is 30mm. It's going to sit a lot smaller on the wrist. You can see it. For me, it's quite wearable. I enjoy watches of this size, but for others, it likely would be too small. The history of Rolex is wrapped up in incredible technology and important marketing efforts. It is in some way what made Rolex stand out from its other brands, and also gave it a lot of its success it's had over multiple years of being in operation. And I think this 6430 is no exception, and is a great way to experience what makes Rolex special. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at this really interesting reference 6430 manufactured in 1954. It's a really interesting part of Rolex's history that maybe you haven't been so familiar with, maybe you've heard of it. I really do think that case size plays a big role in the watches that people are going to know about, obviously, because it's like, if the watch would fit me, then I would be interested in knowing more about its history. But I do hope that, giving you some information about the Speedking might have educated you a little bit on some of the things that Rolex was doing in the 1950s, actually really from the 1930s through to the 1970s. I think these were manufactured, or this reference was manufactured, or Speedkings in general were manufactured all the way through the 1960s. So quite cool, cool bit of history, and hopefully you learned a little bit of automotive history as well through this watch. As always, there is going to be an article on lifeandtherest.com where we will document this watch. It will be the first link in the description of this video. If you want to see some of the Rolex advertisements we were mentioning, as well as pictures of the watch, as well as the case back and the movement, there will be an article with those pictures that you can see it. So be sure to head to the description of this video, and it'll be the first link there. Let me know what you think about this reference 6430 in the comments section below. And if you are new to Life on the Wrist, be sure to subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend who might be interested in watches. If you are feeling generous and wouldn't mind liking this video, it really does help the channel out. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching this video, and until next time.